Thank you, Rebecca. And I will start my presentation. Is this on? By talking about, I have a mic here, thanks, learning and teaching in the upper primary grades. And in my presentation today, I'll give a rationale for why it's important to focus on these grades, and I will also talk about learning and teaching factors which we need to take into consideration as we look to strengthen teaching and learning in these grades. So why upper primary, you may ask? Well, according to documents from research done by organizations such as the United Nations, USAID, and the World Bank, there's a learning crisis. Over 617 million children are not reaching minimum proficiency levels in numeracy and mathematics. And that's over half of these children and adolescents. And if this trend continues, in Central and Southern Asia, 81% of these children will not achieve their MPLs by the end of primary. And in Sub-Saharan Africa, that would be 88%. So these are children who are in school, but who are not learning. As Rebecca just mentioned, upper primary is a stage in education which is really significant, but is often overlooked. And if we are to achieve the SDG Goal 4, if we are to sustain learning across basic education, and if we are to improve learning in these grades, we cannot afford to ignore strengthening education in these grades. So today, I'm going to look at some factors which affect learning in these grades. And these are developmental, sociocultural, and socioeconomic, as well as multilingual. I'll start by defining, for the purposes of this presentation, what upper primary is and the upper primary child. So these are children who are between the ages of 8 and 12 or 13 and who are in grades 4 through 6 or 7, depending on the educational system. And they have various developmental characteristics which we need to take into account when we're thinking of their learning. For example, we all know that physically at this stage, these children are having growth spurts. They're having growth spurts and they're experiencing puberty. This is really important for teachers to take into account. We want children in these grades to continue to play and be active and get up and out of their seats. It's not just for the younger children. In terms of social and emotional development, as we all know, they're asserting their independence, they're forming peer groups, searching for their sense of identity, and these are factors that teachers need to be taking into account, as well as particularly for all children, but particularly for children who are learning and who are in school in conflict situations. Cognitively, children are reasoning more, especially abstract reasoning. They're thinking more logically about their experiences. And this is where teachers need to delve more deeply into working on facilitating critical thinking on the part of these learners. Metacognition is something that I'll be repeating a lot in this presentation, where we need to work with teachers need to work with students to get them to think more about their thinking and to help them monitor their learning and help them become more responsible for their learning. This is Sadia. And I got Sadia's story from UNICEF Togo website. She's 10 years old. And Sadia had to drop out of school because she had to walk 4 to 8 kilometers a day to fetch water for herself and her family. Sadia's story is representative of many children in low and middle income countries. At this age, they start having more responsibilities. And this could be childcare, taking care of younger siblings, or it could range to child labor, where they actually have to contribute towards family finances. Water and sanitation and hygiene is an issue for these young girls, and that may lead to absenteeism and dropout. There's the issue of child marriage and the rigor, the academic rigor, which changes for them, also needs to be taken into account. Just a minute. We have 20 minutes.
It's 20 minutes.
Yes. It's like, no, I don't have 1 minute left. So the rigor also affects, can lead to academic failure, where kids just feel they can't cope and they drop out. And I suggest and recommend that educational systems need to change so that they can make space for the lived realities and experiences of children such as Sadia. Sadia's story ends happily. She gets water in her village, she goes back to school, and so that situation is solved. But we need to think beyond get to school at 7 or 8 and it's over at the end of the day, so that we can make sure that we are attending to all of these children. Okay. All right, I knew it would skip. In terms of multilingualism, there we go, it's going to skip. In terms of multilingualism, we all know about the rich multilingual nature of low and middle income countries, and this contributes so much to the cultural and socioeconomic fabric of these countries. But when it comes to education, this can be challenging and it can pose problems. Right now, most countries agree with having mother tongue instruction in early primary. But again, many language policies have children exiting these mother tongue programs at maybe grade 3, sometimes grade 4. And the complication comes in when they get to grade 4 and they have to learn subject matter like science and mathematics in the international language. And we have to question, are they ready? In many cases, they haven't quite even mastered proficiency in mother tongue languages, let alone moving into more academic rigor and science in English. And in many cases, again, they may have only had English for 30 minutes a day. So what does this mean for the upper primary learner? It means we have to have a holistic approach. They have to be at the center of teaching and learning. We know that it is critical to introduce social and emotional learning, and this should not be a subject. It should be infused throughout the curriculum so that we have safe, nurturing, and inclusive schools. Of course, we want to continue to have quality curriculum that is developmentally appropriate. And we want to make sure that we engage families and communities to work to overcome some of these issues like child marriage and absenteeism. So to keep children in school and to ensure that schools are welcoming places for these parents. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about curriculum and teaching. I'm going to talk about specifically literacy and language, numeracy, and then teachers and teaching. All right. So regarding approaches that we can take with respect to literacy and language, we want to really emphasize, especially if we're moving into teaching international languages, we want to emphasize teaching of all 4 language skills. We want to emphasize listening, speaking, reading, and writing. We want to delve deeper into reading comprehension, so it's not just about facts and that children are inferring and learning to summarize. We need to remember that there will be children who enter these grades who have not mastered basic reading skills. So we need to remember to continue to teach the 5 components of reading. They may still need to learn about phonics, decoding, and so on. And my colleagues from the Rwandan toolkit group, if I can call you that, from World Vision, will delve deeper into this. So there needs to be small group, careful, purposeful scaffolding, and teachers need to be taught that, because very often P4 teachers are not ready to do that for the children who are entering these grades. We also need to emphasize writing every day. The writing genres should be introduced, and again, this is where teachers need to introduce metacognitive strategies such as peer and self-assessment. Okay. There are also what I will call additional international language approaches. So, for example, we have English as an additional language or English as a first additional language. And the goal of these approaches is proficiency in this international language. So that's one approach we could take. Other approaches are bilingual approaches. So we have, for example, code switching, where the teacher might use both languages and switch back and forth in them to support the learner's learning of the second language, or in some cases it might be their third language. So the goal here too is usually proficiency in the international language of instruction. Then we have approaches like translanguaging, where the goal is proficiency in both languages. So it's a bilingual, and we're looking to make sure that children are fluently bilingual and proficient in both languages. And in some cases, it may be even more. My colleague Lydia Karamba will delve deeper into translanguaging, but an example of that is for children to perhaps read a text in one language and then respond to it orally in another. Resources are vital. We want to have more access to a variety of texts, particularly informational texts. We want children to know about and have the multi-literacies needed for them to navigate the 21st century. And my colleague Laurie Asaf from Texas State will be talking a little bit more about multimodal ways of teaching children. And my colleague Bonnie Norton, who isn't here, but she's listening, she'll present through Zoom, and she'll talk about the African storybooks and forms of digital stories. Numeracy. Again, this is an area that we need to emphasize more. We want to make sure that when children are learning mathematics, what they're learning is applied to their real life and real-world situations. We want the goal of mathematics to be creative thinking, invention, and imagination for these children. But most of all, we want to make sure that teachers are teaching not only the content, but also the language, so that children are able to improve their language as they learn mathematics. So we're going to do a little short activity. I'm going to ask you to turn to your partner. So this is an example. These are what they call polysemous words. And I want you to turn to a partner and say to your partner how you would explain an everyday word like table and the mathematical terminology table. And anyone, choose anyone. We have 1 minute. Okay. Okay. Are minutes up? I don't know, maybe I should ask Rebecca again to... Rebecca, do you want to try doing your, everybody look at... Okay, great.
So I was asked to do this, and we've all known each other, most of us know each other a long time. So apparently what's going to happen when patients or anybody who's speaking needs your attention is that I will clap and be the bad cop, and then
Thank you. So I'll have anyone say to us what they have for table. Anybody can raise their hands. Yes. Thank you.
Table.
Mm-hmm.
And we use the example on the board as a graphic representation of information.
Right, right. And it's ordered in columns and rows. Perfect. What about even? Yes.
Even and discounted is like 2, 4, 6, 8.
Right. Anything that's divisible by 2. Mm-hmm. Anything else? Yes.
We talked about many different, even as in its levels.
Exactly. Smooth, level, like this table. Yeah.
Or I didn't even get here.
Exactly. And so grammar comes into it, or even though, so you can imagine the confusion of the language learner. I'm seeing even, and they say it means this, and now the teacher says it must be divisible by 2. And these are challenges teachers have. Anybody for operation? Yes.
Physical operation, but in mathematics, when we're teaching mathematics, we talk about operations as what you're doing. Are you doing subtraction, division,
Exactly.
Multiplication?
Perfect.
Addition?
Thank you. So these are some of the challenges, and these are some things that we need to take into account as we prepare teachers. And so what does this mean for upper primary teachers? It means we need to make sure, especially starting from pre-service, that we're preparing strong content teachers. They need to know their content, and they need to know how to teach their content, which we call pedagogical content knowledge. Teachers need to be skilled in forms of assessment, especially assessment which will help children monitor their own learning. They need to be proficient in the language of teaching and learning, and Christy and Alyssa will be talking a little bit more about this in their presentation as well. And for in-service teachers, we need a variety of ongoing professional development on their subject matter, as well as whatever other needs they have. We need to have social and emotional learning for students and teachers. We need to make sure that teachers understand the developmental stage and how to teach children at these stage. But we also have to have SEL for teachers themselves, especially teachers in conflict areas, because we want them to be motivated and have the passion to teach. And we know that motivation is often an issue in these grades. We want teachers and educational systems to provide support to ease children into this transition. We want to make sure that they're providing continuity through developmentally appropriate curriculum. Children themselves need to be prepared for the transition, and this may involve a lot of planning amongst P3 and P4 teachers. And of course, we want to involve parents in the community. So why upper primary, and why upper primary now? I conclude my talk by going back to the beginning. There's a learning crisis, and we need to make sure that children are leaving school proficient in literacy and numeracy. And we need to do this to sustain the gains made in early primary. We need to do this to sustain SDG 4, and we need to continue to bridge that gap between primary and secondary and create lifelong learners. So we need more investment, more time, more resources in supporting education in these grades. And so I hope my presentation and the presentation of my colleagues will start this conversation about strengthening teaching and learning in upper primary. Thank you.